A guten Erev Shabbos. Last week we spoke about being positive and seeing things and discussing things in a good light. So the best way to say this is 3 cheers for everyone who starts out the Seder with good intentions of making it all the way through. Of course, there's a lot of preparation, getting your home ready for Pesach, then getting everything together for the Seder, above and beyond wine and matzah and maror, as we've discussed frequently lately in Shul, the dinner itself. So the fact that we're still awake by the time the Seder starts, that's a little miracle right there. The Haggadah, the family and guests, to get it all to come together at the right time in the right way, well, it's a tall order in the best of times. So it really is inspiring. And with all that's asked of us, how faithfully and reliably so many of us rise to the occasion. Rabbi Sachs writes that it shows you that people are not looking for an easy way to do things. People want the real thing. The Pesach Seder, which is on the face of it so complicated and really demands so much of our attention and commitment, this is arguably the most universally observed Jewish practice. An Israeli official once said that on the kibbutz where he grew up, they were atheists. No Shabbat, no kashrut, no chicken soup, no candles, no, not even white shirts at dinner on Friday night. We were atheists, nothing. So you didn't make a Pesach Seder? He said, come on, of course, we're Jewish after all, of course we made a Seder. So even for the Jews who imagine themselves free of even connection and commitment to their people, we all show at the Seder night that we know we're all in this together. It's a tremendous thing, really. Kol hakavod to everyone who sits down to Kiddush, to washing, dipping the karpas in salt water, then breaking bread but not eating it, asking the questions, telling the story, drinking another cup, washing and eating matzah with 2 brachas, and then maror, then the Hillel sandwich, then of course the meal. Now, let's talk about the last 4 out of 15 steps that come at the end. Once the kugel leftovers are back in the fridge, and you couldn't possibly eat another piece of chicken. Let's not talk about the Pesach brownies. There are 4 seemingly simple steps at the end of the Haggadah that do not get a lot of press coverage. They are Tzafun, Beirach, Hallel, and Nirtza. Tzafun is Afikomen, but even more than the usual sense we think of. Beirach is blessing, grace after the meal. Hallel is Hallel, what we said this past Thursday in honor of Rosh Chodesh, but on Yom Tov and at the Seder, it's a fuller version. And Nirtza is the conclusion, whatever that looks like at your table. When we say they don't get enough media coverage, doesn't mean CBC is deliberately ignoring them or they don't have their own social media profile. We're talking about important things here. When you go to buy a new Haggadah, how do you decide if it's worth it? Some of the Haggadahs cost a pretty penny, more than 2 zuzim, if you know what I mean. So it's worth it to see if you're going to get good value for your purchase. One way to ensure this is to look at the parts of the Haggadah that don't usually have commentary. Look, anyone can come up with a good insight into what the 4 questions mean to us today, or what the 4 questions would actually be if they were written today. Fun fact, there are different versions of the 4 questions. Apparently in temple times, one of the questions had to do with eating only roasted meat. Then the Rambam's Haggadah has a different order of questions. All gets our inner child very curious. Anybody can come up with symbolism for 4 sons or 4 children and who they might be in our world. Your 4 favorite hockey teams, 4 political parties in Israel, 4 superheroes, whatever. No judgment here. And we should do that. We should search our minds and hearts for resonances in the classical story to the contemporary experience. But rarely do you find good commentary on the second part of the Haggadah. After the matzah, after the maror. Try out this hypothesis. Pick up a Haggadah in your favorite Jewish bookstore and leaf through the commentaries and explanations into the 4 questions, the telling of the story, the rabbis in Bnei Brak, and the significance of unleavened bread. Then have a look at the very last part of the Haggadah, after Shulchan Aruch, after the meal. See how much your Haggadah has to say about Birkat HaMazon. See what's on offer about Hallel or on Chad Gadya. Okay, sometimes there's a good historical insight into Chad Gadya, but not always. Or even the Afikomen. What does it say about Afikomen? It should be eaten before midnight. Why? What's that all about? Which midnight? By the year 1600, scholars tell us, there were 25, that's right, 25 different editions of the Haggadah in print. 100 years later, that figure had skyrocketed to 37. Okay, remember, in fairness, Amazon had not been invented yet. How many versions of the Haggadah are there today? Are there 4,000? Are there 5,000? There's a figure of 7,000 out there on the internet. But that doesn't take into account all the ones that we've made for ourselves, right? We pasted in the pictures, then Xerox them again for the whole family. Nowadays, there's desktop publishing. It's much more sophisticated. Saves you money on paste. Are there 20,000 different editions? Who knows? Art Scroll alone seems to come out with another couple dozen Haggadahs every year. In one of the recent ones, with insights from the late Rabbi Yaakov Perlov, the Novominsker Rebbe, who passed away during COVID, you'll find over 100 pages of discussion and insight and stories after the meal. So on Tzafon, the Afikomen, there's about 3 pages. Now the Afikomen gets a lot of notoriety, mainly because of the game at the beginning where the kids, or maybe a big kid, whatever it is, snatches the Afikomen and holds it for ransom during the end of the meal. A lot of handling goes down with that Afikomen. Maybe that's where Jewish kids learn to negotiate a deal. Afikomen is a reminder of the Korban Pesach, which was the Paschal offering, which was eaten at the end of the meal. Some say it's a reminder of the matzah that went along with it. So according to this commentary, this Art Scroll Haggadah, Rabbi Perlo at his Seder would put the Afikomen on his shoulder, because there's a verse, which we'll read on the first day of Pesach, that says that we carried the dough out of Egypt on our shoulders, wrapped in our garments. Commentary says very nicely, why did the Jews carry the matzah on our shoulders out of Egypt? First of all, the time for eating matzah with the Paschal offering had already passed. It was the night before. Jews left the next morning. And furthermore, says Rashi, we took all our flocks with us. So it would have been a simple thing to just tie the extra luggage, all the boxes of shmura matzah, on top of an animal, let them carry it out. So the message here, it says, is love for a mitzvah. Even though the time for the mitzvah may have passed, the matzah still has some of the specialness to it. It doesn't lose its power to inspire us. Really, we should carry the whole Seder on our shoulders the whole year, wherever we go, because those messages of freedom and unity and deliverance are important every day of the year. We only make an evening program and dinner out of it on story time, 1 or 2 nights a year, but it's important all year round, every day. On the next step, after Tzafon, which is Beirach, this Haggadah notes that we always mention Yerushalayim, we always mention Jerusalem in our grace after meals, even the short version that you say after you have a cookie or a kichel at the Kiddush. This is because not only is our sustenance provided through and in merit of the land of Israel, but a Jew, even on the other side of the planet, here in Toronto, expresses our acknowledgement and gratitude for all the blessings of Israel. This right now is a moment in history when our Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, offers the Jewish people many opportunities to speak negatively about Israel, about the Jews in Israel, but we know better. We know the extent to which we are all in this together, and we cannot and we should not turn one Jew against another. Next step is Hallel, the penultimate step of the Seder. There's an explanation not on every verse in this Haggadah, but on 1 or 2 for each chapter. Ma ashiv la'Hashem, kol tagmalu alai. How can I repay God for all his kindnesses to me, writes King David. It's interesting. We think of him as David HaMelech, a legendary Jewish hero of all times. However, since he was a grandson of Ruth, who was not born Jewish and joined us from the nation of Moab, David's status as a Jew was actually questioned in his times. It's a Gemara in Yevamos. We get outraged nowadays by the questioning of someone's Jewish status. How dare we? Fact of the matter is, we need to know definitively who is who. It doesn't matter if that person is a future king of Israel. Spoiler alert, he was Jewish. The paperwork squared away. Identity is a very hot topic, very hot social issue these days. We could take a lesson from King David, this chapter of Psalms, and take it down a notch. This verse in Hallel is him expressing his thanks that all's well that ends well, even though there was a little bureaucracy to navigate along the way. The last step of the Seder is Nirtza, acceptance. We pray that all that we've done is accepted and has the desired effect. Many Haggadahs have the Chsal Seder Pesach, The little prayer, the order of Seder, is now concluded and prays that we merit to see the restoration of the Korban Pesach in Zion. The Novominsk Haggadah parallels the 15 steps of the Seder, this one is number 15, to the 15 steps of Dayenu. If you read all the way through Dayenu, you'll count 15 steps, ma'alot tovot, good steps or kindnesses that God did for us that we say thank you for, specifically. What is the last of those in Dayenu? That God built the temple for us to make kapara for all of our transgressions. Banalanu is Beis Abchira, l'chaper kol avanisenu. That suggests a connection between the 15th and final topic of the Seder, Nirtza, and the 15th and final topic of Dayenu, to atone for our sins. So it's no doubt, no coincidence, that the opening of our Parsha this week, Vayikra, the first Sedra, first Parsha portion in the book of Leviticus, knits these two threads together right at the very beginning in verse 4. Verse 4 of chapter 1 says, V'samach yadai al rosh ha'olah, he places his hand on the head of the offering, and it will be considered pleasing on his behalf to atone for him. The conclusion of verse 4 is v'nirtza lo lechaper alav. You have there nirtza and lechaper, to atone. So when you're tired at the end of the Seder, some of the people are already snoring in their chairs or on the couch or on the recliner. There may be a few things left to put in the fridge. Shul starts in just a few hours. Think about this segment of the Seder, its conclusion, after the meal. Think of it as being something akin to a little Yom Kippur. Not that anyone has to fast, God forbid, but that sense of cleansing, of closeness, of accomplishment, of redemption, of renewal, and of strength, and maybe, above all else, of joy, is what we're accomplishing with the last phases, even in the very last part of the Seder, including Chad Gadya, Echad Miyodea, and all your other favorites. After 3 years of very strange, very uncomfortable, very exiled years of the Seder, may we enjoy it this year in the fullest with good health, complete joy, and tasting the true taste of redemption. Shabbat Shalom.